Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Mark Adelsberger, and I'm with the IPM Institute of North America. Steve Culman from OSU Worcester is going to come up and give us some updates and progress on the Tri-State Fertilizer Guide. So, all yours, Steve.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Good morning, folks. Good morning. How's everybody doing today? Excellent. Good. Well, I have to start by offering my regrets that I wasn't able to join you yesterday. I was in Zanesville, if anyone cares. But I heard it was a good conference so far and a good day, really productive day yesterday. So I'm going to be here for a little bit this morning, and then I'll have to sneak out. But happy to try to answer any questions that you all might have, and we can, as I'm going through this, if you have anything at all, please don't be afraid to raise your hand and ask. So I've been in my position for a little over 3 years now. I'm in the School of Environment and Natural Resources at Ohio State, and I'm the state specialist in soil fertility there. So I handle all things soil fertility related. And I was asked to come and talk today about some of the work that we're doing in terms of updating the fertilizer, TriState Fertilizer Recs. So what I'm really going to do is just talk a little bit about, I'm going to assume that, I'm not entirely sure who the audience is. I'm going to assume that there's some folks that don't know a whole lot about ag, so I'm going to probably start fairly basic in terms of what the tri-states are. I'm going to talk about a couple different data sets that folks here I think might be interested, and then I'm going to get into some of the work that we're doing and kind of where we're going and where we've been. So, okay, so Tri-States were a collaboration between OSU, Michigan State, and Indiana. This was really an industry-driven collaboration that nearly didn't happen, but there's lots of stories about how this all came about, but it really has served as a cornerstone in terms of how we think about managing fertility, how recommendations are generated, and really in the context of phosphorus, it's this idea of a build up and maintain approach. So this is a concept where the logic is that we want to build our soil test phosphorus levels to a sufficient level, i.e. over that critical level, and then we apply to match removal rate of crop nutrient. And so that's we in essence build it up to what we think is a good level and then maintain it over time. So the idea, of course, is that as soil test levels are lower, your fertilizer rate goes up, and then here is this critical level when you may or may not have to apply. Then there's this interesting drawdown range, and the drawdown range is really if you're only fertilizing every 3-4 years or something like that. So it's all there's a lot of uncertainty right now in terms of where things are going. It's unclear if we're really can continue with this drawdown range or not. So 1995, of course, we're talking 20 years ago, and I asked farmers, who here has been farming for more than 20 years? And then, show of hands. Who here, has anything changed in the last 20 years in agriculture? Well, it's like a better question is, has anything not changed, or what hasn't changed, right? So, the idea of a lot of the data that went into these recommendations, of course, is much older than 20 years. And so a lot has changed, right? And so we don't need to get into the specifics, but the way soil is managed changes, the way the crop rotations, the genetics, there's a lot of variables that are different these days. And then another, I think, very important concept that we really need to recognize in terms of thinking about nutrient recommendations and how we are going to be prescribing to farmers what a recommended rate might be is the idea that well over half of the cropland in the state is rented ground, and a lot of this ground is in short-term contract. So the idea of investing in a soil to build it up and to maintain it over time is really, and oftentimes not really applicable or not of interest if you're in a short-term contract. So I think we need to really recognize that, because it is a big chunk of what the farmland is out there in the state, and I think it's important to, when we're thinking about fertilizer recommendations, to take that into consideration. And so I don't get out much, but I've heard there's some kind of water quality issue, but I don't know. Oh, that's up in Wisconsin. Okay, I got the wrong state, sorry. So, of course, well, you don't really need me to say anything about that. So that's why we're here. Part of the justification for this work, of course. And so, you know, I think it's kind of interesting in my time here, just giving a lot of talks, talking to a lot of folks, a lot of farmers. We do, you know, farmer training. We do all kinds of stuff in extension. And just different kind of perspectives in terms of people coming to the table and legitimately interested in being a part of the solution to this problem, right? So for whatever it's worth, I just thought I'd, you know, try to capture some of these ideas in terms of, I get growers that say, well, you know, these recommendations are 20 plus years old and I've got really productive ground. Are they still applicable, right? And so that's a really important piece that we need to kind of consider. I just mentioned this idea about rented ground and kind of short-term land contracts. So can we think about nutrient management not from a longer-term build and maintain approach, but maybe more of what we call a sufficiency approach, which is just feeding the crop? Of course, you know, there's a lot of growers that are concerned about nutrient runoff, and they're legitimately interested in addressing the problem, being part of the solution, right? And then this idea that technology, is always or continues to be playing a more and more important role, a central role in really how farming is done these days. And with that technology, you know, how do our recommendations actually adjust to when, instead of applying a blanket rate to a field, people are getting custom applications and applying nutrients at various rates throughout the field. So before we know where we're going, we should probably know where we've been, right? And is anyone, let me ask, show of hands, has anyone actually downloaded or looked at the Tri-State Recommendations? Has anyone ever looked at that document before? Okay. Oh my goodness, wow. You're not farmers, I can tell you that, because that's not the common response. So it's a very nice, highly vetted document, but it's not very transparent, right? There's very little data actually in that document. And, you know, this is just kind of a sad reality in terms of understanding people, you know, we're kind of just in our coming to age in terms of data and data permanence. And a lot of these old fertility folks that were part of the Tri-State Recommendations, they had data in old file cabinets, and those folks retired. And guess what happened to that, 6 or 7 file cabinets of field study data that was all, it went in the trash, right? And so there's a lot of, there's a lot of work that's been done that's honestly been lost and people have not been able to find. In Ohio, we have, it's not quite that dire, and so maybe some good news here. So Jay Johnson was my predecessor, well, my predecessor's predecessor, and he was the fertility specialist in Ohio from 76 through 99 or thereabouts. But every year he put out one of these annual reports, essentially, for the work that they had done in the fertility program. Now, this was never really published, wasn't even digitized. It was just what they did. And so when I arrived in my office, just like my predecessor, they plopped a stack of these reports down in front of us. And so we spent a lot of time and a fair amount of energy going through and kind of scouring all these reports. So from again, 76 through 99, we went through and basically tried to recreate the data that went into the Tri-State Recommendations, okay? Now, we have to understand that different states had different roles, and we don't think of the legends tell us that Ohio didn't have a huge role in terms of forming the P and the K. They had a bigger role. Well, they had a decent sized role in the potassium, but not so much in the phosphorus. So a lot of the P and K work was done by Dave Mingle at Purdue, and that's what. So I'll just take that with a grain of salt. Anyways, we found 68 total trials in phosphorus and 92 in K. And more interestingly, probably hard to read, especially in the back, but the distribution of where those sites were. This is a number right here. The number in each county represents the number of trials that were in that county. What county is this right here? 98 trials in what county? Who's my geographer? Clark County. Does anyone know what's in Clark County that's significant relative to Ohio State? Yep, it's the western branch, okay? So it's the western ag branch. We've got Wayne County with 27 trials, and then Wood County with 15. So really, and then just a few here and there. So really, well over 80% of the work in P and K went in on 3 farms, pretty much 3 soil types, okay? Here's the breakdown between responsive or non-responsive or statistically significant versus not in corn, soybean, wheat. So there are the numbers. And then this is what we do. It's a lot of damn work to generate 2 little graphs, right? I mean, this is somebody's career, more or less. Each one of these, I know, I don't try to think about that. Hopefully I'll have more than 2 graphs by the time I retire. But each one of these data points is a field trial, right? And what we're looking at is relative yield versus either soil test phosphorus or soil test potassium. And in the tri-states, of course, they're still based on Bray-P phosphorus and ammonium acetate for base cations. So what we do is we calculate relative yield as the ratio of the unfertilized plot, the average of the unfertilized plots versus the fertilized, right? So if there's no difference, we multiply it by 100. If there's no difference, our relative yield is 100, which is this black line. And if there is a yield reduction, we see it down here, right? So this red line here happens to be what the tri-state critical values are, which is 15 ppm for Bray phosphorus and 100 ppm for potash, although I will give the caveat that potassium is based on CEC. So basically it's 100 to 115. And then the gray points are the ones that are statistically significant. So this is a very general relationship we see in soil fertility all the time. As soil tests decline, our yields get reduced. As the soil tests increase, our yields essentially plateau off. So, yes, sir.
Are these field tests or plot tests?
These are small. It's all small plot research.
All small plot research.
Small.
So what you have as a soil test, would you be pretty sure that it is representative of that plot?
Yes. So soil tests, the way Jay Johnson worked, a lot of these trials, so a single data point might be the same trial but different years, for example. It's a site year essentially. That soil was sampled on a plot per plot basis. It wasn't a field composite or something. So it's good information in terms of what that soil test value is. Yes, sir.
Was the management of each plot recorded as well?
We have all that. That's right. Yeah.
Were they all consistent, or were they all very same?
It's mostly tilled ground. It was this was back really rotational till, no till didn't get widespread adoption until the mid 90s here. So most of it is in some sort of chisel tilled system. So it wouldn't really be even considered. It's not really minimal tillage. It's a tilled system. Yeah. Other questions? So what is this showing us? What does this mean? What do these 2 graphs mean? Why am I showing you this? It means that the tri-states critical levels are, I look at this and say it's pretty well justified. And that actually, the work we're doing now is quite different. I'll talk about that in a second, but this is, believe it or not, for fertility work, this is really damn clean data, you know? I mean, we've got one site right here that's responsive when it really shouldn't be according to our critical level, right? So, okay, so I just wanted to show you that for what it's worth. Any questions? I'm going to move on. Yes?
Where did the Lake Erie Basin site fall on that?
So we looked at it, we broke things down by site, we broke things down by crop. There was, we broke things down in the case of potassium for cation exchange capacity, because that's how we've been basically by CC. We found no justification to split any of it up. You know, there was no general trends for any of it.
Yeah, but it was Hoytville, so where was that presented?
Yeah, sorry, maybe I misunderstood the question. This Wood County site it's on Hoytville clay, and that's at the Northwest Research Station in Custer in Wood County.
Oh, so it wasn't on the site.
Yep. Okay. So my most recent predecessor, Robert Mullen, in 2006 set up some long-term P and K studies. Again, at these three same sites, you know, this is a kind of a common theme you'll see with station work. These really are the three farms in Ohio that most of the field crop work is done. And so this is an experiment that's continuing. I'm going to kind of go through it pretty quick, but it's basically 9 years, 2006 to 2014, of a corn-soybean rotation. We've got 3 rates of phosphorus and 3 rates of potassium. So it's a true zero. So plots that weren't fertilized for 9 years. We've got a 1-time removal rate and a 2-time removal rate. So these removal rates are based on estimates from crop harvest, right? So obviously we're harvesting crop, pulling nutrients off, and that's what those fertilization rates are based on. So this work is published if anyone's interested in the details, but you know, it's important when we think about this to think about where we started from, right? So were these soils were they elevated in values, or were they deficient, or where were they? So I'll point you to our Clark Wayne Wood sites, and then Bray, phosphorus, and ammonium acetate potassium here. So all 3 sites were in what Tri-States would define as that maintenance range of 15 to 30 ppm. And depending on who you ask, these might be high or these might be low, depending on the manager, right? And then for potassium values, 113, and then we have an elevated value at Wood County, which is not atypical because of much higher CECs. These are, again, these Hoytville clays. So there was 42 total comparisons in terms of looking at fertilized versus unfertilized over the course of 9 years, so 3 sites. I'll just ask this question because it's a good question to ask. It's kind of fun. How many times out of these 42 trials, 42 site years, do you think that we saw significant response to fertilizer? 0, 10%. So 10% would be about 4, half. Any hundreds out there? No $1? Okay, well, I guess we got a $0. I don't know if you can bid $0 on Prices Right, though. The answer is 10, so 10 out of 42 times, okay? And did the responses, were they greater over time, all right? So we just bin this on the first 3 years, the next 3, and then the last 3, okay? So for phosphorus, there was 6 out of these 42 site years that were responsive to P fertilization. Of course, we can see that over time, those unfertilized plots are getting drawn down with crop removal. This makes sense. This is intuitive. And then we get to potassium, and true to form, potassium just doesn't behave like it should, and it's confusing, and it's hard to understand, and that's, you know, but that's, so we've got 2 responses, and then 1 and 1. So this is basically how it kind of panned out. So then farmers always ask, well, what about those soil test levels, right? Because yield responses are going to be very dependent on what those values are. So this is like my great head scratcher right now. what we're looking at is across the columns, the 3 sites. On top, the top row is Bray phosphorus, the bottom row is ammonium acetate potassium, and then we've got our 3 fertilizer rates. The red is essentially the drawdown, so that's the unfertilized over 9 years that has not been, not received any nutrients. But what's really impossible for me to wrap my brain around and to understand is that it would appear that at both the 1x and the 2x removal rates, soil test trends values are trending downward over those 9 years. So I really have no idea why this might be. I've talked to colleagues about this from other places. No one really knows what's going on. We've sent these soils out. We've had them tested for Bray P with the Bray P extract ammonium acetate. We've had them tested for Malic 3 in 2 different commercial labs. The values are real. It's like a real phenomenon, but I just don't understand. I can't really tell you what's going on. So maybe some smarter people than me in this room can tell me that, or yeah. So what we've done with this study is we've actually we've decided to bump it up to a 3-time removal rate because we're trying to build, and part of this study is looking to see yield responses. That's important, of course, but really from a long-term perspective, look to see drawdown of phosphorus and potassium levels and build up with that. So, yep.
On the responsive sites, or were there any trends at all as far as stress years or 1x, 2x rates?
If it was significant at 1x, it was significant at 2x.
That was a non-factor.
That's, yeah, but never were 1x and 2x different from one another.
Growing
Yeah.
conditions?
No, dry years, we looked at all that. It's the only real trend. I don't have the yield. I mean, I took the yield data out, but the only real trend is potash and soybeans. Soybeans at Clark County, at that western branch, are responsive, and we saw, even though it wasn't significant some years, statistically, there was a clear trend in terms of reduced yields on average at that Clark County site. And what's interesting is that if you look at the equation in the Tri-State, there's, for potash, there's this plus 10, so there's like this 10-pound addition, and people call that have been around for a while, call that the J. Johnson fudge factor. And so if we and there's stories about Dave Mingle and him like nearly having a fist fight at Fort Wayne when they were trying to get down and like figure out what the recommendation was going to be. So it's interesting because if Jay did most of his work in Clark County where we saw, it's probably a very K-responsive soil, so I don't know. That's just an anecdotal story, but yeah.
Did you have a plot with no crops?
A plot with no crops, we didn't have that, no. It's not part of the design, yeah.
Phosphorus fertilizers used in 95 versus what you're using now, what differences?
So the trial was started using, so what happened, it's fertilized at right after soybean harvest, and then it's incorporated with a light disking or a chisel till, depending on the site. And it started with TSP 0460, and that has become very hard to find, and so now it's a fall fertilized MAP application is what it is.
Which one is more water soluble? Similar?
Yeah, they're very similar. I mean, MAP's a little bit more soluble, but it's, I don't know, it's not much. Yeah.
Soil total phosphorus test data?
Yeah, we've not measured that, but I've got a PhD student who's going to be working in these sites, and he's going to do some phosphorus fractionation work. That work hasn't started yet, but we're going to be looking at that over time. Yeah.
Is there, there's been discussions of under different soil biology, is instead of tilling, say no-till or something that's got a different soil quality than these plots. Is that part of any plans?
Yeah, it's a great question. This whole idea of thinking about phosphorus and phosphorus cycling, internal phosphorus cycling, in the context of what happens when we start building those labile carbon pools, but there's to my knowledge, there's really not much of that work that is being done. I mean, we've got some soil health work going on, but that's a really important component to this. But those are questions that are, they take time to answer, and they're difficult really to set up, and they're difficult to draw really clear relationships. It's a lot of, correlation analysis is what ends up happening a lot of times, yeah.
Is it possible to pinpoint where the 6 is fastest for PR and the 4 is fastest for potassium?
I should have just included it. I can show you all the data. It's actually, again, if you, Better Crops, that's an online journal it's, you can just go and pull. The yield data are on there, so if you're interested. We've got a little bit more synthetic one going that's under review right now that encompasses a little bit more of this work, but this is kind of just like the quick overview version. So if anyone wants more information, I'll have my email up here. Feel free to just email me. I'll be happy to share. So, okay, so I'm going to move on unless there's other questions. I want to talk
Real quick, which ones of these had the highest organic matter?
It's the Wood County site right here with that higher CEC. Yep. All right, so now I'm going to talk about what I was actually asked to talk about, which is talking about the overview of TriState Recs. And so this is money, it's checkoff dollars. There's a little bit of USDA money coming in here as well. I think it's important when we kind of sat down and thought about this, how we wanted to do this. It's this idea, and I got this question just already about small plot versus strip plots. Farmers are inherently more trusting of large strip plots than they are small plot research, right? That's just a universal. So we really thought it was important if we wanted, not just in the context of making new recommendations and having no one follow them, but actually having farmers, buy in. So the majority of this is on farm. And then something that I can't really take any credit for, but the Corn Board was really adamant about trying to get CCAs, agronomists, ag retailers that are the ones that are actually making those recommendations to be part of this process. And so a really large chunk, over 25% of our budget for this whole project just goes to help basically pay crop consultants, county, OSU extension county educators, agronomists, whoever is interested in working with us, basically pay them to help facilitate these trials, right? So what we're doing is corn, soybeans, and wheat, nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and sulfur. Okay, and the sulfur is kind of the latest one to come, but there's just so much interest and misinformation about sulfur, we just felt like it was really important to include that. So we can kind of contrast these two models, right? In terms of the old model where the university scientist kind of toils away in isolation, or maybe not so much, but few sites, many years of data, put it all together, versus what we've been doing the last several years. And if you look at the red and the blue dots up here, these are the dots that we've conducted on-farm trials at this point that have some kind of fertilizer manipulation. And is it perfectly represented across the state? Well, you can see that it's not, and do we want better representation in Southwest Ohio and in Northeast? Of course we do, but we're really at the mercy of who comes to us and offers to volunteer to run these trials. So I couldn't have picked an uglier picture for you all, so you can thank me later for that. But our approach is really a pre-fertilization soil sampling. We do when that plant is going from vegetative to reproductive stage, we take a tissue sample and analyze that for nutrient analysis. So that gives us an indication of nutrient deficiency. That's a kind of a common tool that's used. And then we, of course, get grain, and we're measuring nutrient concentration in grain for all of these samples. So we have a very good database in terms of what our realistic nutrient removal rates are. So there's two basic approaches depending on the nutrient. For nitrogen, we're doing a full nitrogen rate trial. This is how you basically have to do things when you do multiple rates and try to fit a line to it. But for PK and sulfur, we're really just doing the single rate of, well, it's a single design of a fertilized versus a non-fertilized. So it's this binary thing. We're very flexible in terms of field size. We tell farmers, you know, find your rate, just make it more than 20 pounds or so. And so they kind of, a lot of this is directed. I mean, we ultimately will vet what they want to do. We tell them that, you know, we give them a protocol. Here's what we're suggesting. If you want to do something different, let us know. So there's a lot of back and forth that happens. And I think it's you know, okay, so the advantages to this is that it's much more farmer directed, and for a region or whatever, you know, we've got people that are actually interested in doing things. The disadvantage, the main disadvantage is quality control, right? So we've got a lot of different maybe permutations of trials, and the reality is that we don't really know what we give them as detailed of instructions as possible and guidance, but we don't really know exactly what's going on these farms, right? So I'll recognize that and probably incorrectly assume that every single one of these trials was done correctly, right? So we started in 2014 with soybean only. We've moved to corn and soybean, and then just added wheat. And you can see, I don't have the total numbers here, but this last year we've really exploded. We had 92 trials last year that with some kind of fertilizer manipulation. So, you know, it's just a tremendous, basically, body of data that's getting generated, okay? I don't know if that sounds like a lot, but I can assure you that's many, many trials. And it would definitely not have been possible if we were trying to go out and plant these things ourselves and do the work ourselves. So, yeah, I do have this number, 151 trials total, but that's diluted down because we've got to think there's multiple crops and then multiple nutrients, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, sir?
Steve, are these replicated?
They're all replicated and they're all randomized. So, you know, it's minimum of 3 replicates. There's a lot that have 4, but probably the majority of them have 3. Mm-hmm.
What's the minimum size of a strip or plot? Or?
Yeah, so we don't set minimums. You know, we say that we like at least 400 feet because some people, surprisingly, most people have actually brought weigh wagons out and used weigh wagons for measuring yield, which in my estimation is a much better way to do it rather than a yield map. But if they are giving us yield map data, you know, the magic number is somewhere between 450 and 500 feet is what, when we think about the adjustment for the combine calibration and that whole problem, it's 400 or 500 feet is typically a magic number. But we've got, you know, of course, some of these on-farm plots are, a few of them, like we're running some trials with the corn and soybean performance trials, and so those are on-farm technically, but they're small plots. So the plot size really does vary. To me, it's not an important factor, you know. I mean, I think what we're really after is identifying a soil type with a unique management history, and then, of course, this unique thing that happens every year called the weather, which is never the same thing twice. And so we just try to, in essence, multiply our soil type by management by weather combinations and get as many of those as we possibly can.
So the strip is short enough or small enough that it's on a single soil?
Definitely not. No. I mean, I mean, we assume that in our analysis, but it's certainly not the reality.
You said 400 or 500 feet. You're talking length.
So it could be, I'm talking length, that's right. So in terms of the width, so it could be 12 row, it could be 60 or 90 feet, depending on whatever the width, you know, a lot of people, if they're running nutrients through their planter, it might just, you know, it might be a 12-row planter or what have you, but if they're doing it broadcast, it might be a 60 or even 90-foot spinner spreader, and that would define the plot width.
So if we're doing replicates, chances are it may not be the same soil.
I think it's highly likely it's not, yeah. So, you know, and I mean, the whole notion of having two soil types in a field, of course, is a flawed way to think of things because that's a continuum as well, right? So we just have to bend things in the ways we do. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned management. Is that long-term history management or that year management?
So the management, we have a management, so one thing I didn't show in that approach, we do get a pretty detailed management survey, a questionnaire that we have them fill out, and we capture things like tillage history and, you know, of course, if they cover crop or manure history, things like that. So we have all that data. We have not even touched it in terms of teasing any of that out, yeah. And unfortunately, don't be mad, promise, I'm not going to show you any data right now because it's not ready. That's because we were so swamped. We've got some stuff done from the first couple years, but we were so swamped this year with the number of trials that you know, we literally just a few weeks ago got all of our farmer reports back to them. So every trial, we compile all the raw data. We do a statistical analysis on every single variable. We try to synthesize that in a very simple form, and then that's what we provide to each grower. So that takes, I don't know if that's necessary, but it sure does take a lot of time to do that, all that, yep. Okay, so where are we headed? The intention is to keep things as a tri-state document. I believe that that is gonna be the best product. It's, you know, that's, it's challenging, and scientifically, we're not really clear if it's really appropriate. You know, I mean, at some point, 20-odd years ago, it was deemed appropriate to have a single recommendation across 3 states. It's arguable if that's really an appropriate way to manage nutrients. I'm not sure it is, but we're really hoping that the data have some insight into that. And we really don't want to produce a document that's just going to be something that we roll out, sit on a shelf for another 20 years, and then they'll wait for, you know, me, old crusty fart, to get out the door before the next guy comes in and does it again. So we want to have a system that's dynamic and that when we're doing trials, as we continue to do trials, that can feed in and whatnot. So, and then that last point, you know, that's our timeline. Sometime in next year, we're hoping to roll out the new recommendations. Yes, sir.
Michigan and Indiana also doing plot work, and was those numbers included in what you showed?
So, is Michigan and Indiana doing plot work? Yeah, they have done some. They have not done anything to the extent that we have at this point. And so, to make matters worse, there's been turnover and da-da-da, so it's unclear. I mean, I'll tell you that if we keep it as a tri-state document, the majority of that data that in that document that will be current will be coming from Ohio. So, not to say that they haven't been doing the work, but in terms of looking at, you know, a lot of work in Indiana has been done with, say, nitrogen and corn. I mean, a tremendous amount of work there, but for the P and K part, not so much. And there's been some work in NP and K in terms of Michigan, but there's more, you know, there's focus on sugar beets, on potatoes. So every time you add a crop in there, just like your whole effort and pool just gets diluted down a little bit more. Of course, they're a big wheat state as well, so.
Back on one of the other slides, the few responses were 2014 through 16, more than in your sense that that's related to higher yields, or not really?
You're talking about
Yeah, keep going on.
this one here? Yeah. This one for me doesn't relate to weather so much, but it relates, you know, we did things where we looked at differences by year and then, you know, related that with soil. Of course, we only have 9 years here. It's not like as robust as we'd like, but this is just more of it's more of a function of that in my mind. And soil test phosphorus drawing down.
That's your preferred explanation.
Yeah, and you know, I didn't say this, but dashed lines, this is the maintenance range, right? So really, according to Tri-States, every time these red lines cross here, in the case of Clark County, it's pretty much after that first year, they basically draw down. According to Tri-States would predict that there would be a yield response when in fact there weren't. But that's fine, because it's fine for me anyways, because we understand that these recommendations were set up to be conservative in nature, right? And so I know that, especially, it's a very different time right now, but the reality is when farmers gamble, when they're risk managers, right? And so when they don't apply fertility and they get burned bad. And when they apply for a little bit more fertility that they need, or if they're not sure, that is not economically, it's not a huge disincentive. And so therein lies a major, that is why we're here today, right? Because of that economic reality. Because guessing and not being right is not a big deal if you're applying, but if you're not applying and you guess wrong, you get burned bad.
So would it be safe to say that the places where you saw the yield responses are the places where soil test phosphorus drop below the critical value? ppm, or is it not that straightforward?
It's a good question. So the distribution, it's not that straightforward, because there was some from Wayne County, and we can see Wayne County, according to this, it would tell you to apply. The Tri-States would tell you to apply, but it would tell you to apply at removal rate. And that's just to maintain your soil. So in other words, that critical level, basically, it can be defined as the chance of not seeing, very good chance of not seeing an agronomic response to fertilizer. The only reason we're applying fertilizer when it's above that 15 ppm is to maintain, to add for what we're removing from a crop. Yep.
As I look at that data, we've been proceeding, a lot of us in the room been proceeding with a couple assumptions. One of which is that we probably could get by with less fertilizer than is being applied, because we had our soil tests, pretty good levels in the basin. And the second one was that it was going to take a long time to draw that down and a long time to impact the phosphorus problem. As I look at those graphs, that turns both of those assumptions upside down. I see it drawing down very fast, and I see where you're putting it on at 1x, you're also losing, you're also drawing down, and didn't you say you had yield reductions too?
Yeah, depending on the site and the year, yeah.
So that tells me I'm not sure what we know.
But most fields didn't have any yield response. It was just a handful. There's 6.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
This is a nice teaching tool for farmers who are constantly told that you need to spoon feed crops, right? It's like, it's not just every year, it's every year plus some liquid foliar or like whatever, right? So there's this constant message of spoon feed, spoon feed, spoon feed. And it's clearly, it's 3 sites, but in these soils, it's not the case, right? It's not to say that they're not responding, there's some sites and whatever, but it's certainly not a universal phenomenon, right? Mm-hmm.
Well, okay, so what I've noticed out in the field is it's a whole lot more weather affects it, because if you get that 1 week where it's cool in the spring, even though you've got high phosphorus levels, if you don't have the right amount of starter out there and that corn turns purple, it's done. It don't matter. Once it got dinged, it never, no matter what happens after that, that corn never reaches any more potential than it lost on that day. So any one of those correlating points across any one of those could have been affected by some weather anomaly that either made it greatly enhanced or almost have no uptake of it. That variable out there is huge.
All I'll say to that is that, we did have so this is the beauty of a direct manipulation, right? Because we have plots that didn't get it and we have plots that did. And when there's no yield response to fertilizer, we can make what I would assume is a safe assumption that the plots that had fertilizer, even if it was cool, that fertilizer was there to supply and not limit the yield potential of that plant.
Was the fertilizer banded, injected, or broadcast?
It's broadcast and lightly incorporated. Mm-hmm. Yep.
What's your tissue test show with these things? Does it show declining P levels in the tissue test? Or?
It does, yeah. You can pick it up in the tissue test pretty readily, especially with potassium in soybeans in particular, and phosphorus in corn in particular is where we see the biggest difference.
But it didn't break the critical levels?
Actually, all of our data were all below the Tri-State published critical level for tissue testing. So that needs to get revised, in my opinion. Because even the 2X was, I'm just going to show this. So email, phone, and then if you want more information about the trials, if you're interested or if you're just curious about what we're doing, the approach, that will link you to kind of some of our approaches depending on the nutrient and the crop. Any other questions? Last questions? Yes, sir.
Back to your charts, it's just, you know, you have the gradual drawdown, the soil test phosphorus. Do you think that's because of loss or because of tie-up? And when you have that 2012 year where the 2 times rate, the soil test phosphorus increased, but then it went straight back down when the rains came back, it kind of implies we may be losing some of that phosphorus, and it's reacting to that soil test phosphorus level pretty rapidly, which I think is kind of, we've always been told that, well, you won't see a change in soil test phosphorus, so that's why we only do every 3 to 4 years.
Yeah, is the declining values in soil test trends due to crop removal, or is it some kind of blocking up mobilization in the soil? I think it's probably both.
2 times it's going down.
Yeah.
You think you'd be building, or at least maintaining?
I think I would, yeah. So.
Not showing up in the tissue.
And I'll say that other states that have really good data on this, the same trends are not there, right? I mean, Iowa's got 35 years, 40 years of long-term P and K removal, and when they apply, it builds. When they over-apply, it builds. When they maintain, it stays the same. And when they, so I don't, you know, we're just gonna keep looking at it. Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, I'll just one last thing. I'll just leave folks with, you know, fertility folk. A wise retired person told me once, fertilizing with P and K is like putting money into a bank account and earning negative interest. You just feed the soil, and you don't ever get it all back. So I don't know if whatever that's worth. Yeah, I don't know if that's true, but that was his lifetime experience. Yep.
I can agree with, as a farmer, I farmed for a guy, just custom farmed his ground, and he's had beans for 40 years straight. And I asked him the last time when he last fertilized, and he said 8 years. Well, I got a farm that I grid sample all the time, just within the same west of him, about 2 miles, same rainfall. He got the same beans, and it was dry down there, 43 bushel. I got the same thing. And I've often wondered about fertilizer, if it's just a joke, except for the nitrogen. Because the number one thing is drainage and weather. When you do everything else, it might not make a difference.
That's right. If I showed you the yield data, not surprisingly, you got three fertilizer rates, and they just bounce. That's what happens. It's weather driven. Okay, one last question, then I'm really going to give Robin her time. She's already going to over.
When you're talking about your farmer friends was making, neighbors was making the same, except nitrogen, it's very much true, because if you look at the organic matter, the source of fixing phosphorus in the field, and phosphorus that is existing in the soil is very sufficient, about 10, 15, 20 pounds per acre should cover what you need, because phosphorus is very
there, but of course, with all things soil related, it's what form is it in, right? So just because it's there doesn't mean it's plantable. Great, thank you everybody.